And these have now, almost 100 years after they were actually predicted by Einstein, have also been measured now by gravitational waves measuring experiments such as LIGO. So we will see what the author has to say about wormholes, but this is another thing that general relativity allows for. So allowed what they called bridges. Now, they didn't call it necessarily wormhole, but basically this paper that Einstein wrote with his student Nathan Rosen, they called it, or maybe the publication called it, Einstein-Rosen bridge. But that's basically the sort of the first literature or first mention of wormholes in literature that we know of, or it holds some significance in this particular category of topics. Okay, so if you're interested in learning further about wormholes, this might be something that you look up, for example, is why I'm kind of mentioning it. Okay, so Einstein and Nathan Rosen wrote a paper in which they showed that general relativity, what they called bridges, allowed for what they called bridges. Einstein-Rosen bridge is that name, but which are now known as wormholes. So back then when they published, they just called it Einstein-Rosen bridge, but now we call them wormholes. The Einstein-Rosen bridges didn't last long enough for a spaceship to get through. The ship would run into a singularity as the wormhole pinched off. However, it has been suggested that it might be possible for an advanced civilization to keep a wormhole open. So, whether or not wormholes are real or not, there are some logistical challenges, let's say, with wormholes that make them kind of technologically difficult for us to access and actually use and whatnot to do time travel, etc., which makes us think that this is not a very practical aspiration for us to have and really sort of pursue. But if technology were to get a lot better, then maybe. So again, it has been suggested that it might be possible for an advanced civilization to keep a wormhole open because it may just like close. To do this, or to warp space-time in any other way so as to permit time travel, one can show that one needs a region of space-time with negative curvature. So just like, space-time is bent with gravitation, we know that. But basically, if you want this sort of time travel thing to happen, then you need space-time to have negative curvature, like the surface of a saddle. Ordinary matter, which has a positive energy density, gives space-time a positive curvature. So ordinary matter, interacting with each other with like gravitation, for example, would give you a positive energy density, as in energy density, gravitational field would be attractive and bend space-time in the way that is familiar to us. And it gives space-time a positive curvature like the surface of a sphere. Actually, see how Earth is sort of a sphere? It's kind of like that. Think about it that way. The Earth is mainly made up of ordinary matter, and the gravitation of the Earth kind of gives it that sphere look, right? So it's sort of like that. So what one needs in order to warp space-time in a way that will allow travel into the past is matter with negative energy density. Energy is a bit like money, says Stephen Hawking. If you have a positive balance, you can distribute it in various ways. But according to the classical laws that were believed at the beginning of the century, you weren't allowed to be overdrawn. Ray asked, are white holes allowed? Do you mean like white dwarfs and neutron stars? If that's the type of thing you mean, then yes. There are other deaths possible for stars. Black hole is an example of a stellar remnant. What happens to a star after it dies, a very massive one. And some other options for when a star dies would be white dwarf or neutron star. But these happen for less massive stars. Or do you mean a black hole that is incredibly hot or something like that? We have talked about black holes because of quantum fluctuations maybe emitting certain particles, giving black holes a temperature. We have actually talked about that from this same book of Stephen Hawking, who worked on this. So you might